people are not going to be able to afford rent. It's only kind of getting worse. And it's just, if we wire ourselves for compassion as opposed to judgment, I think we could just do so much better.
When adversity came, I could have fell apart, but I chose instead to follow my heart. When adversity comes, I will never run, I will adjust, adapt, and overcome. Vision. Woo! Welcome back, everyone. Welcome one, welcome all to your one-stop shop for everything empowerment. I am your host, Tariq Williams, and not only I am Vision of Hope, but we are Vision of Hope. And welcome back to another episode, everyone. And for this episode, I'm always excited, but I always love when I have special and fantastic guests with us to just pour into us and pour some knowledge into us about the great things that they're doing, to learn from their experiences. And well, we have another fantastic example of that. So once again, I am your host, Tariq Williams, and we're going to get into it today. And I'm going to introduce my guest. She has her own blog up in Canada, and we welcome
Woo!
her today. Welcome, Kathy Heath from the Autism Edit. Thank you for joining us today, Kathy.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here with you.
Awesome. It's a pleasure. And I know we were just talking a little bit here in Arizona. It's a solid 87 degrees Fahrenheit. What's the weather over there in Canada right now?
Yeah, I'm in Edmonton and it's 14 degrees here. And for October, that's actually incredible. 14 Celsius. I don't know what that translates into in Fahrenheit, but for us, that's very warm. It's very
Okay.
unseasonably warm. Yeah, so I'm
Okay.
happy.
All right. So I'm not good at the conversion myself, but if you're listening, leave in the comments what 14 Celsius is in Fahrenheit, and then we can make the comparison if that's cold or not. But Kathy, I'm so excited to have you here today, and I think that your story is so interesting, and I think that there's a lot that individuals can learn from you. And I know that once again, you had your blog and you've created it, and basically learned a lot from when you had a son that was diagnosed with autism. And so I want to learn a lot from that experience, how it shifted your mindset, and moving forward, what the different things you've been doing since that diagnosis, and what your mindset has been like. So ultimately, language is super important to the podcast. And I want to start off with getting one word from you with what you were feeling when you had a son that was diagnosed with autism.
I think I was feeling fear
Hmm.
at the time. That has shifted. It's been a few years, but definitely at the time, a lot of fear.
Okay. Okay. And what was the why fear? What were you worried about?
Um, so my son was diagnosed in 2016, but it had been suggested we were on a wait list by his
Mhm.
pediatrician in 2015, which
Mhm.
doesn't seem like that long ago, although I guess it is actually like what, 8 years ago now.
Yeah, yeah. I,
um,
I mean, the last 4 years didn't really happen, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
just
exactly. So it was three and a half years ago.
okay.
And no, it was 8 years ago. And at that time, when I would do Google searches and stuff, which of course is the be all end all, you go down
Sure.
these rabbit holes and the outlook was not good. It was always so bad. It was always
Mm.
the worst of the worst. Prepare yourself for just horrible outcomes, and your child's not going to be accepted anywhere. They're not going to be able to do anything. Just so much negativity. You're a bad mother. At
Oh
the time,
gosh.
there was a
Wow.
really big theory that it was caused by cold mothers that didn't like love their children or hug their children or be affectionate with their children enough at the time. And
Mm.
it was very, which didn't, it, I couldn't, I obsessively cuddle my children and am like very affectionate with them. So it didn't,
Yeah, yeah.
that didn't hurt me too bad. But yeah, it just, there was nothing really very positive online about it. And it just made me feel afraid for what that meant for his life.
So, did you feel like you had, I mean, before you started gaining the knowledge that you have now, were you at a place where you felt some sort of guilt? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that too, for sure. So with
Mhm.
autism, a lot of the research shows that early intervention is kind of key for a so-called positive outcome.
Hmm.
And my son wasn't diagnosed until almost 5 years old.
Okay.
And again, we had been on a wait list for specialists for like an official diagnosis for about 9 months. So like this all kind of started right at his fourth birthday.
Yeah.
Um, so I was very overwhelmed with guilt because early intervention is sort of through those toddler years. And supposedly, if you are on top of it, your child will just have a far better outcome, which I don't personally agree with because
Hmm.
you can compare kids all you want, but if one person hasn't had early intervention, how can you track their progress? They didn't have it. You can't compare them to having had it or having not had it.
Sure.
So it doesn't reconcile for me that that's the truth. While I do agree that early intervention is very important, and I do wish that I had been more aware of the signs of autism and been able to get him more help during those years, absolutely. I don't disagree with that theory. Um, I've let it go. I've let go of some of the guilt around it of not having known more and being more open to supports and help through his toddler years.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And gosh, I mean, ultimately, I mean, you mentioned that you're on a wait list and you're working through this whole parenting thing, and yeah, you know,
Ugh.
but ultimately, you're just doing the best you can, right? You're doing the
Yeah,
best you can. Um,
absolutely. I think all parents feel that way, right? Like
yeah,
no one's out to do a bad job. We're all human. We make mistakes. We hindsight is 2020 and we just feel like there's so many things that we could have done that we didn't do, but you
mm,
don't know. Again, it's like you don't know what your kid would have turned out to be had something been different and you'll never know. So
yeah.
let it go because it doesn't serve you to dwell on it and it's not helpful to anybody.
That's so important. If it doesn't serve you, you accept, you learn the lessons or what have you, whatever the case may be is, but it doesn't serve you to dwell and just stay in that negative state, because all that does is destroy your mindset in terms of moving forward, because you're so stuck on what happened 3 weeks ago, and it just doesn't have to be like a diagnosis. It could be anything. You're so focused on what could be going wrong 3 weeks ago that you can't do what you have to do now.
Yes, and I love that. I love that about this whole podcast, your whole vibe, Tariq. I just love that we're on the same page about stuff like
Yeah.
that for sure.
And so when that happened, but I appreciate that. But when I think of your brand, what you've created, and I you are a great example. If when something kind of goes, a little bit unexpected, how to just get the knowledge and figure out what it means to be a part of the solution. So tell me, what made you, start the blog, and what were some more of the thoughts in terms of your mindset that was going on in your head?
Well, we got very lucky, my husband and I, with the supports that we did end up getting. I don't think everybody gets as lucky as we did.
Mhm.
He sort of had a connection to a really wonderful care provider, supports provider. Like they provided us with a therapist, an occupational therapist, a speech pathologist,
Great.
all those kinds of things. So we did get very, very lucky in that sense, and they gave us top-notch people to work with. And again, being in Canada, very lucky. We were all of that was government funded because of our son's diagnosis. We were given that support through the provincial government here in Alberta
Hmm.
and again, lucky to have even been living in Edmonton. We have like a world-class autism research center right here in Edmonton. The specialists that we
Wow.
saw were
Wow.
some of the best in the world. So like a lot of luck.
Yeah.
I can't emphasize that enough. And because of that experience, because of just where we were geographically, the amazing supports from the very well qualified people that we had been connected to, it just felt like I learned so much that I never would have learned before that experience.
Yeah.
And then I didn't think to blog about it initially. And
Okay.
then I was working with a friend helping her support her blog. And she was
Okay.
like, "Why don't you blog? You could help so many people.
Yeah.
Why are you
Yeah.
sitting on this info?" And
Yeah.
so then I was like, "Yeah, you're right. It's why like, I don't know why I just take for granted the skills that I have learned."
Yeah.
And then I was able to start that, and I've connected with so many people through, like, emails, DMs, everything, and it's just been unbelievable to share that knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. I'm hearing a bit about your journey as a parent, and I can't help but to reflect a little bit on my journey as the son in the situation. So, being diagnosed with blindness at the age of 16 is a unique experience, to say the
Absolutely.
to say the least. But I think about how my parents treated me in terms of still treating me the same and wanting the best for me and all that, and like just not thinking that it wasn't anything I couldn't do, right?
Mhm.
um but and then my mom on the flip side as well, she still always kept those high expectations for me, right? and so it's Tariq, like, I still expect your room to be clean, I still expect X, Y, and Z, good grades, all that. And in my head I just was like, but can I still do that stuff? And then mentally you start having a conversation in my head, and I was just like, I guess if other people think I can do it, I guess I still can. And that was some of the initial growing pains, I could even say, in terms of my diagnosis. And so being a part of the solution. So Tariq, you still want to go play basketball? Let's figure out how you're going to do it. Tariq, you like to write or you want to go to college? All right, Tariq, well, figure it out. Not that we knew where the resources were, but we were
Mhm.
willing to go find them. And guess getting back to where what you were saying about having all those great resources around you. I've had some really neat guests in the past year, and a lot of them talk about, and you've been no different so far, talk about the fact that the support around them was great, and how they couldn't get to where they were without the support. And so how important was it to you to have the support that you got, and how did it help you get through the process?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a game changer, like, even just family having my sister there, I'll never forget, she
Mm,
watched my other kids the day that we went for my son's diagnosis, and I
yeah,
just came home and completely fell apart, even though
yeah,
I knew that's what we were going in for, I knew that would be the outcome, and there was
yeah,
relief in that. Just being able to come home, have know my other 2 children were safe in their home with someone that cared about them and loved them, those things are huge. Having someone to cry to in harder times and just who's not judging you for feeling like, "Oh, does this mean you love your child less?" Or you know what I mean?
wow,
They
yeah,
don't question those things at all, like, at all, like, they are just there to support you, it's amazing, and then outside of that, in the autism community, what really helped me so much was hearing the stories of other families, like, just exactly that, like, how your mom was such a champion, and I know it's a different scenario, but, like, how
mhm,
she was just like, "Alright, we're just gonna figure this out, we're gonna pull it together. Doesn't matter what the negative things online are or what we read in this book, like we can find a way around that or over it or through it together." And I think that's so important, and hearing those stories of other families that had been through something similar and then maybe had gone on for a few more years and overcome some of those bigger hurdles that we were about to face was just so inspiring to me, and that was another part of why I needed to share my stories so that I could kind of help people with that too, of saying, I've been there in the fear and the guilt and the shame of it,
yeah.
of having missed it, and it's hard, and you have to deal with that. You can't get over that immediately, but there's hope on the other side of it.
No doubt. No doubt about it. And so after all that, you're working through these different situations as an individual, and you have your family there. And I can't help but to think about my situation. If I'm being honest with you, there were definitely some tears in my situation as well. However, I did my best to figure out once again what it was like to work through it and manage, overcome. And I had a big identity piece for myself. I wasn't sure if I was still the same person. So once again, when individuals were like still treating me the same way, I was like, what are we talking about here? Like, not that I believe that I was defined by my eyesight, but
Mhm.
I had never met any other blind people. I'm the first one I ever met. And then I started thinking, well, I'm pretty cool. So there you go.
Hey, yes, good for you.
Yeah. So now, when we're talking about how that mindset piece and how having a son with autism and how you were able to get through that, how did your mindset change on life moving forward?
It definitely took me a little while to grapple with accepting his diagnosis
Mhm.
because again, I had just read too much negative stuff and I just thought this doesn't add up for me. It wasn't working.
Yeah,
Um, and so it did take me a little while, but then I just remembered like he is still him.
yeah,
Exactly, and sure, this changes maybe some challenges that he'll have to face and some hurdles that he'll have to overcome and maybe the wrong people in his life that he'll come across will treat him poorly because of this, maybe. But those are
mhm,
again, they're just not for him. It
yep,
doesn't mean that he's not gonna find the right people, he can't become who he wants to become exactly like you're saying, like, if he wants to play basketball, let's find a team. If he wants to he's really into art, he's a phenomenal artist.
mm,
Um, let's get you in the right class with the right teacher, which we have, and it's just, letting go of defining someone in one small way
mm,
and still seeing them as a whole, full person and seeing that they do bring something so unique and special to the world, no matter what a doctor or specialist wants to call it, right? And
yeah.
and that's only one piece. It's an important piece. It's an important piece of that person, but again, they're not defined by that disability.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Because individuals try to box you into your disability or box you into whatever the case may be is, right? But once again, you're still an individual, you still have likes, dislikes, places you like to go, etc. I mean, and you said your son enjoys art. I think that's fantastic. And so
Mhm.
I'm not much of an artist. When it comes to my version of art, I like to write. And
Nice.
I'd
That
like
is
to.
art.
There you go. Exactly, exactly. And I like to put in one form or another. This podcast is art, right? We have fun here. So
Of course.
so so when we talk about that shift of your mindset, and I know that you had your son with autism and your other kids, and so you're a parent and you're working through all that, but ultimately you have your own life as well and your own things that you're working through. And something I noticed about your brand is that you're all about giving back. And I noticed there's a lot of things even about the environment and everything like that. So one, how do you make time for the things that you want to do and the change that you want to create? And tell me a bit about some of the things that you're doing environmentally.
So I think the best way to make time for the things that you wanna do is to say no to the things that don't really light you up, and that
Mm,
was a tough lesson for me to learn, and it's what I'm still working on. I think definitely strong boundaries around your time, being aware of your values and what actually matters to you.
yeah.
I wish I was more of an environmentalist. I definitely do care about those things. I have a lot of work to do. As you can see, I have too much stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
big consumer.
Mm,
But definitely, I love bringing awareness to certain campaigns that are important to me. And I think just really taking the time away from motherhood, away from everything you are to everybody else
mhm,
and just sitting with yourself and thinking like what do I really care about, what are my values, and then really only saying yes to everything
mhm,
that matters to
mhm.
you, not to you the mom, to you the sister, to you the neighbor or whatever, just
Yeah,
like what really matters to you. And that's how I have been able to be more fulfilled and champion the causes that really actually matter to me.
Mm.
recently.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So so when you're figuring out the values and what those different things look like to you, um I think you kind of already answered this, but I want you to make it clear for the people, because this is a word
Mhm.
that I feel like people struggle with, and I think that it's important to address. Um, so balance. So
Mhm.
when you think of balance, and if this is for a parent that is going through something with their own children, or any individual going through whatever it is they're going through, I think some ultimately they're trying to find balance. So, what does balance look like for you then? And what would your advice be? And then I'll comment on that.
Personally, I don't try to find balance in every day. I think it's sort of more of a seasonal thing. I know that's kind of a cliche, like whatever season you're in. But even for me, like right now, my kids are older. They're 13, 11, and almost 7.
Hmm.
So 3 years ago, my life was very kid centered, like
Yeah.
extremely kid focused, and especially during the pandemic, doing
Oh
the
gosh. Wow.
homeschooling,
Yeah.
all those yeah, and, like, my son needs a lot of support, so
Yeah.
sitting with him all day, trying to get him through school during that time, he was in grade 2, 3 yeah, grade 2 and 3 during those years where there was a shutdown, and then I had my other son who was in grade 4 and 5, and then my daughter was in preschool at that time,
Hmm.
and thankfully, like, my husband was here and he helped our older son with school, but, like, there was no balance at that
Yeah.
time. It was very kid focused, it was very family focused. I didn't have a lot of time for me. And then now things are getting a little bit back to normal. They go to school every day for the most part. And then there's like a little bit more breathing room for having that time to slow down and think about myself. But did I have that balance before? No, I absolutely didn't. And I think it's just trying to see it as an overarching theme in your life as opposed to just sort of nitpicking at yourself when you haven't hit it every day or every week or every month even. Like, life is busy, and I think
Yeah.
it's very easy to beat ourselves up, especially we're so inundated with messaging online by people doing it better, people doing it bigger,
Oh
and
gosh.
it's easy to just get down on yourself, but it's not helpful, and
Y-
you'll you'll find a way.
Kathy, when you said, and so I wasn't sure if we were gonna agree here. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't sure if we were gonna agree. And
I welcome the disagreement, please.
but when you mentioned that we're in line and everything like that, it's so true. It's so true. So, because when I think of balance, ultimately things are always happening in our life, right? We're trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B with like the least amount of resistance sometimes, but then obstacles pop up, but then you still want to make time for the things that you enjoy, and then we have all these different responsibilities, right? So ultimately, the destination of wanting to be happy and find joy, etc., that doesn't necessarily change. But what that balance truly looks like, I think, and you mentioned it, so I'm going to give us a phrase for it. It's truly that imperfect journey.
Mhm.
There's going to be things that pop up, there's going to be things that happen, and ultimately you just do the best you can, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And
All those
so,
things are challenging.
yeah. And so making time to write for your blog, and making that time to have this brand, and I noticed that you're always trying to give resources out to people, and you are finding like good functional clothing for women, and then you have the environmental piece that you have going on, and all these different things, and even trying to work on what it might look like to advocate with different members of parliament there in Canada. um and then you're still a parent, right?
Mhm.
So making sure that you're giving value in all these different places, and making sure that you're parenting to the best of your ability. How do you feel like you do all those things?
I don't. I mean, I definitely don't.
Yeah.
Um, Imperfectly, just like you
I was
said.
gonna say, but you do though. You say that you don't, but you do. You do.
Yeah.
I'm on your Instagram, Kathy, and I'm just like, gosh, how do I get more like Kathy? How do I do that? I was hoping she would have some tips for me.
Oh
So
my gosh. I think again, it's just I am very lucky and my life
Mm,
wasn't always like this, but I do feel like I'm aligned with my values and I
okay.
love being a mom. I really do. I became a mom younger than I anticipated, but
Mhm.
I love being a mom and it's I when my kids want to go to the park, I like going to the park. I want to jump on the rides with them.
Oh,
I want to watch, the live action Little Mermaid movie. That's so exciting to me.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like a
yeah.
child. I love those kinds of things, and it really does light me up, and then getting to do work that is very fulfilling to me, that does give back, that really it just brings a lot of joy, and it's energizing to me. And again, it was difficult. I didn't always know what my values were. I didn't always know what mattered to me. And before then, I would say kind of yes to everything and just sort of be like flailing and not finding time for myself. But when I take the kids to the park, like, I find joy in that, so that it is sort of a time for myself, and then when
Mm,
I
mhm.
like to exercise or, like, even walk my dog or something like that, just get out and move, like, that brings me a lot of joy, and it's very fulfilling because that's a value of mine, right? And I think once you can really hone in on what matters to you, and again, it is so hard when we are just inundated by messaging from everyone on social media, but what
Yes.
really matters to you, and then I think it doesn't feel like an overwhelming schedule. It feels like again, another cliche, like I don't have to do this. Like I get to do this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I hope the people are hearing you. I hope the
Yes,
people are
take it
hearing
in.
you. That's it. You're pouring into us right now because you're like, gosh, I don't have to do this. I get to do this. I get to be a part of the solution. That's
Yeah.
awesome, Kathy. That's awesome. And we haven't even talked about everything because you're you're also working on. You and I were talking before a bit about the homelessness issues a bit there where you're at in Canada and trying to figure out what housing looks like for individuals with cognitive disabilities and working with members of parliament to be a part of the change in the infrastructure so that is no longer an issue. Can you talk a bit about what you're doing
Mhm.
there?
Yeah, so for me in Canada, again, as I had mentioned earlier, my son was very well supported in his youth. Like when he was really little, we had a lot of funding for supports because that was supposed to help him have a great life. And then it was sort of like, he's good, goodbye, which
Oh,
is not
okay.
good. So it really got me looking into what are the long term outcomes for adults with intellectual disabilities. And it's not good. It's not good.
Mm,
There are a lot of studies. And again, the homeless population or the unhoused population, I guess is a better term for it, are kind of tough to study because, of course, they're sort of nomadic and they don't have a fixed address. So it's hard to get
mhm,
in touch with them. But there's a lot of really good quality studies that have suggested that about 30 to 40% of adults, or I'm sorry, about 30 to 40% of the homeless population could be connected to an intellectual disability. And so
wow,
there are many pathways. Yeah,
wow.
it's very, very bad. It's not a good
Yeah.
outcome. And do I think that's going to happen to my son? No, again, because I'm very well supported. But still, can I see why it's so feasible that this is an outcome for many? Yes, of course I can. It makes perfect sense to me because you're not very well supported in adulthood. It's hard to get a job. If you're not well supported by your family, where are you going to live? If you can't get employment, how are you supposed to sustain the paying of your bills, of your rent, etc.? If you have in the capacity to negotiate with a landlord, then great. But if you have an intellectual disability, what are the chances that you're able to do that? Probably not very good.
Yeah.
So you need a lot of supports in place. And unfortunately, unfortunately, that doesn't exist currently. And I think after the pandemic, especially, we're all feeling the effects of homelessness.
Yeah.
It's kind of running rampant for a lot of people, and of course, inflation is just taking over. Everything's so expensive. If you don't have a good, stable job that, and like also beyond that, the wherewithal to manage your finances very well and think of things in the distant future and make a plan for those kinds of things, like all skills that are very intellectual and can be extremely challenging for someone with an intellectual disability, then the outcome is not good. So it's just got me looking into longer term effects and housing and how to support these people and how to kind of go upstream and provide them with the supports before that becomes an issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So a couple things, Kathy. So first, once again, being a part of the solution, what that looks like, and I'll say from the blindness perspective, really quickly. We'll have to talk about this another time. But I have some 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 things I'd like to talk about how blindness works in Canada for those individuals. But that's a whole other conversation for another time.
Is it
Um,
bad? I don't know. I'm so naive about it.
if I tell you about it, I feel like you're gonna start working on that too. So, but I
Uh-oh.
we'll have to have a conversation about it at some point. But the second thing that really sticks out to me is how one of the things that's been a common theme in a lot of my episodes is individuals that talk about you just got to take action, right? For your
Mhm.
goals, for your dreams, whatever it is you want to do, you just got to take action. Now, and I'll say this, I'm definitely guilty of this. Um, and I think this is really important for everyone to hear. And so I'm going to point this out and put us all on notice a little bit. You know, there's a lot of different reasons for homelessness, and I don't think we often think about it
Mhm.
like that. I think we're just like, oh, there's so many homeless here, we got to get away from this area, right?
Yep.
It's never about being a part of the solution. And so when you gave us that stat about 30 to 40% of the homeless have some type of intellectual or cognitive disability, that hit me a little bit different because I never thought about it that way, and what those individuals might need for resources and what those individuals just need in general, right? In terms of
Mhm.
moving forward. So I that hit me a little bit different. So I really appreciate you sharing, and once again finding another way to be a part of the solution.
Thank you. I mean, for me, I used to live in Vancouver. I know
Hmm.
maybe I shouldn't mention this, but I know you mentioned your wife is from the BC area,
Hmm.
and I there's a lot of homelessness there. There always has been, there probably always will be.
Yeah.
And I had a very naive, uh, sheltered outlook on what that was like when I lived there. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I was like 19 years old when I lived there, really naive in the
Wow.
world in general.
Yeah.
But the stereotype for me was like, oh, these people just got hooked on drugs, and here they are. Like they'd
Right.
rather spend their money on drugs than
Yeah.
go out and live a
Suc-
productive life, right?
whatever that means, right? Yeah, exactly. But yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's so not the case. There are so many pathways into homelessness, and it's just such a terrible outcome. Like, I can't
Yeah.
even fathom, especially here in Edmonton. Like, it's I don't know how people make it through. And we are very lucky. We do have a lot of shelters here. We do get a lot of support. But again,
Sure.
there are so many people that end up in that situation that if they were just given the right supports, it could be prevented. And that would benefit everyone, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just something to really consider, like, how do people get there? Because I do think we do have preconceived notions about it that are not helpful,
Right.
and, there is something that we could be doing better. Obviously, we're all seeing that there's a vast amount of homelessness right now since the pandemic, and with inflation and interest rates are increasing, people are probably going to be foreclosing on their mortgages at some points. People are not going to be able to afford rent. It's only kind of getting worse. And it's just, if we wire ourselves for compassion as opposed to judgment, I think we could just do so much better.
Wow. Wow. Absolutely. Wire ourselves for compassion and not judgment. That's powerful. That is so powerful. If anybody, if you've been listening to anything that's been said, wire yourself for compassion and not judgment. I think that's amazing. Thank you so much for that, Kathy. I think that's powerful for sure. You know, when we think about moving forward in our lives and once again just being a part of the solution and hearing all the great things that you're doing and finding balance and just understanding what it means to be your best self in the world is truly what I think that you symbolize. And you know, you hear the quote, be the change you wish to see in the world, and I don't think I know anyone putting that into action more than you are. um and so ultimately when you think of your brand and you think of your blog and everything like that, what after individuals listen to this podcast, what would you want them to take away?
I think the awareness of exactly that, like, we don't know everyone's story.
Hmm.
When you see someone who maybe, like, for instance, my son with autism, he sometimes jumps and, like, flaps his hands, and he'll make interesting sounds, and sometimes I worry about that when he's, say, 35 and a full-grown man, like, he could be 6 feet tall, and that's
Yeah.
intimidating, and immediately maybe it's different for you. You're a man, I'm a woman. If a man were doing that beside me, I would feel intimidated, like, I would feel scared.
Hmm.
Or I'm sure Tariq, like, I'm sure it's the same walking around as a Black man, and there are cases where people are intimidated by you for no other reason than how you look or how you present, right?
Yeah.
And it's so unfair, and I think again the pandemic has had a really good effect on that of bringing that awareness to people of just how we're so judgmental of people, and we're just not giving people the benefit of the doubt anymore, or holding that compassion for people, and wanting to learn their stories about how they got to where they are, and maybe, holding space for that instead of just automatically making assumptions about people, right? And
Yeah.
I am guilty of that. I used to do that all the time. I'm not trying to preach like, oh, I'm so great. I've never done that. No, I did. I
Yeah.
did. It was
Wow.
terrible. And
Wow.
life is so much richer when you meet people with a curiosity and a compassion instead of just an automatic
Yeah.
judgment. Again,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You know, wow. Gosh. I I'll say this. That's vulnerable. For you to once again just be like, hey, I was this, and I recognize that it's wrong. I think so often individuals sometimes want to be like, I know everything. You know what I mean? And I was never a part of, like, you know, not knowing X, Y, and Z. Um, and so for you to share that with us, one, I really appreciate that. And I mean, gosh, you're right. You know, when there are there's definitely different things in terms of assumptions that have been made about myself, about being black, assumptions about me about being blind, and I go through those things every day. I'm not naive to the fact that it exists,
Mhm.
but that does not change, and I will not let it change the person that I am. And anyone listening, you don't let whatever types of stereotypes people try to box you into, you don't let that change who you are either. But gosh, you're absolutely right, Kathy. And yeah, you got me a little you know, I slightly speechless because I'm reflecting on so many different moments in my life right now. Um you know, just being honest, like in middle school and in high school, I've had individuals, and I don't even think a lot of people know this, but I've had kids come up to me and say, "Hey, um, my parents said I can't be your friend because of your skin color, right? Because you're black." You know what I mean? And that's pretty
Right.
wild to have that happen to you when you're in school. You know what I mean? And so
Or at all.
yeah,
Anywhere.
fair,
Yeah.
fair.
That's horrible. Yeah.
Um, but once again, Kathy, you continue to um just express and pour into us, and I appreciate you for being your authentic self and just being a part of the working on and figuring out what it means to be a part of the solution for all these different things. And I think that's fantastic.
Thank you. And I think
Yeah.
honestly, all that ties into too, like you can't control how people perceive you.
Right.
And a lot of the autism community, like autism acceptance is a huge thing. It's like a real hashtag, in the community.
Hmm.
It's like a main focus. And of course, do I want people to feel accepting of others and all those things? Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. But what I want my son to know is that none of that matters if you don't accept yourself, right?
Mm.
Like when
Ooh.
you go out into the world and it's it's an invisible disability. Like people he looks and I'm sure it's the same for you, right? Like I wouldn't automatically assume, oh, that man over
Yes.
there is having a hard time because he's blind. Like you don't see it right away and you don't
Yeah.
your mind doesn't often go there.
Yeah.
And so that's fine. He can't control other people's perceptions, but he can control accepting himself,
Yes.
knowing that he's not maybe wired the way that the world is made for everybody else in a neurotypical sort of way, and that's going to present challenges, but that it's okay. And what he can control is working on himself, loving himself, honoring who he is, showing up in the world as his best self. And
Hmm.
whoever has a problem with that, they're not meant for him. And whoever will embrace him, wonderful, because there will be great people out there that will.
Oh gosh, I'll say this. I don't know how the rest of the world and all those individuals are wired, but what I will say is this. After listening to this podcast, everyone listening to this podcast is now wired for compassion and not judgment. All right. That's number one. And number two, you know, I'll say this, and I'll speak for myself, and as your son and all your kids grow older, um maybe it'll be the same for them, who knows. But what I will tell you is this: in my journey, the hardest thing for me was accepting my blindness, accepting my individuality. Those were some of the most difficult things for me. um when it comes to when I had a white cane for the first time, right? And walking with the white cane to go from place to place, I wanted no part of holding my white cane because it made me look different. It made me no longer look like society. It made me look blind. And so I didn't want to be a part of that. And ultimately, as I grew older and started, realizing like, hey, this is me, other people are them. I accept this. This is okay. And real quick, let me just say this. It wasn't that quick. I'm only saying it within the 5 seconds because obviously our we could be here for 4 more hours talking about how I learned to accept my blindness and my individuality. It's also probably mentioned in a few other episodes. But that acceptance piece is so important. You know, we learn more about ourselves every single day. Would you say you've been learning more about yourself throughout this whole journey in parenting and whatnot?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like kids bring up all the worst in you, and it's easy to blame them, but no, it's you. It's your stuff that you haven't dealt with yet, and it comes to the surface all the time. And I'm so grateful for that because before I had kids, I would have been like, everybody else is crazy. I'm
Yeah,
great. I don't know
right.
what's wrong with everyone else. And probably for a little while after I had kids too. But I
Yeah.
think in this experience of autism and just seeing like again he can't control the way that his brain is wired.
Mm-hmm.
But we can control how we take action on it and how we move forward and how we support him and teach him that, you know, maybe the world isn't made for you, but you are meant to be in this world, and there's so much value in that. And it just really did. It really helped me grow as a human tremendously. And I don't think I would have if I had not been just so abruptly pushed out of my comfort zone with that.
Wow. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I think it's funny how you said like, yeah, you said your quote unquote your kids probably the worse than you, but then you realized that it was you. I'll say this, parents, you know, friends, family out there, you all know that I'm great, so you know I'm not the problem. Just joking, but uh, before we go, Kathy, once again, I want to thank you so much for joining the We Are Vision of Hope community today. And if I could um once again end on this question, um one word that describes your brand ultimately and what it looks like moving forward, and if you could define that for us.
I would say acceptance, just in that what we just touched on, you
Mhm.
are going to have tough times as a parent, as a human. It doesn't matter. Just accept it. You don't have to put on a happy face all the time. You don't have to be thrilled that, you know, this has been thrown your way. That's okay. You know, you have to accept that and deal with it. And if you try to push it away and wish, you know, or just be happy about it and find all the good and all that stuff without dealing with those things, and I think it
Mm,
will come back up and bite you later.
mm,
And just like you said, how it took you a lot longer than the 4 seconds to tell the story to accept having a cane or
yeah.
accepting supports or accepting adaptations or accepting, you know, in my case, that I felt like I dropped the ball as a mom and I let my child down and I failed him. Like I had to accept that and then move on, right? And
Yeah,
then move
yeah,
forward,
yeah.
take the action, do something about
Yes.
it so that a year from now you can accept that you were given whatever circumstances you've been given and that you're doing the best with them that you can.
You know, the struggles and the hard times that we're going through, if we choose to not learn from them now and not address them now, they're just going to continue to be there until we address them.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
So, Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today from the Autism Edit. We really appreciate you. We'll leave all your links down below, so people can check out your podcast, check out all your social medias, and all that. But once again, thank you so much for joining us today, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I love chatting with you, Tariq. It's great.
This was fantastic. Once again, to all the listeners, thank you so much for joining us. We are visionofhope.com for coaching. Check out the free guide, How to Win Every Day, and navigating the difference between goals and expectations. And on that note, this is your one stop shop for everything empowerment. Have a good one, everybody. Take care. When adversity came, I could have fell apart, but I chose instead to follow my heart. When adversity comes, I will never run, I will adjust, adapt, and overcome. Vision.